Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Robert Shetterly, an artist from Brooksville, Maine, who has created a series of paintings called Americans Who Tell the Truth. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks, Bruce. It's great to be here.
Good to have you with us. Tell us about these paintings and how you got started doing them.
How I got started. I was one angry guy, and it started. This odyssey started for me in the aftermath of 9/11, but it wasn't 9/11 that got me going. It was the dishonesty of our government afterwards, as they started calling for an attack on Iraq as part of doing something about 9/11, and all those what we know now today. We know that they were lying, but and our media should have alerted us then. But anyone who spent a little time investigating what they were saying could find out that all those charges that they were making against Iraq at that time were not true. And I was just feeling incredibly frustrated. I thought, I've got to respond to this with the thing I do best, which is paint. And I thought I had to try to engage the world through my painting, that my role as a citizen in this country was more important than my role as an artist up at that time. I mean, my career as an artist. And that's where it started. And basically it was trying to figure out how to take all the feelings I had of anger, outrage, cynicism, and grief about what was about to happen, and channel them to do something positive rather than just show how angry I was, because I knew that nobody would pay attention to a lot of anger.
And your wife was beginning to wonder about you as well, right?
She, when I first painted the first portrait, and for a brief time was a happier guy, just because I'd found an outlet for that feeling, she encouraged me then to follow it up.
Who was your first portrait?
The first one was Walt Whitman. I mean, he, the great American poet of the 19th century, and I chose him because he was such a little d Democrat, believing that not just people, but everything in the created world was essentially equal. I mean, we know that as, biological scientists today, but then it was a very far-reaching thing to be advocating.
So how many paintings now are you up to?
I've finished 162 paintings. My goal was 50, and when I got there, I realized I was just beginning to get going. I mean, there were just so many people, so many issues, so many exciting things going on that I thought, in my little way, doing these paintings, I could alert other people to some of the issues that were important, and also who the people were who were trying to challenge them.
You started out painting kind of famous people, Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King and Walt Whitman, but then you kind of, over time, evolved into people that really aren't so well known, right?
That's true, and in the interest of full disclosure, I should say that I have painted you, Bruce.
Also one of the less known people.
One of the lesser known people, one of the great voices in, around a host of issues, but especially about the militarization of space. And, that's an issue that very few people are aware of. And, your work has brought attention to it, which is, extraordinary. And that's the kind of person I try to find often, is somebody who's trying to bring attention to an issue that the major media is ignoring, often for a very good reason they're ignoring it. But I do, as I said, I try to do what I can to bring some attention.
We have a couple of your paintings here in the studio. Just very briefly, maybe say a word or two about each one.
Well, the one that's sitting right in front of us here is Jessalyn Radek. She's one of my newest portraits. She was a ethics lawyer in the Justice Department when the first attack was made in Afghanistan 10 years ago. And she was called upon as an ethics lawyer to make some comments about the treatment of John Walker Lindh, the American Taliban who had been captured in Afghanistan. And she told her bosses, including John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, that what they were doing was entirely wrong. They couldn't use it in court. They had lied to him. They had tortured him. This all needed to come out. And they tried to fire her because of it, because of her whistleblowing about what they were doing. They did successfully remove her from the Justice Department, and now she's a lawyer for the Government Accountability Project, actually defending other whistleblowers. And she's going to be here and speaking in Maine on May 21st at the Maine People's Alliance dinner.
Where at?
It's in Portland, and I'm a little embarrassed right now. I can't tell you exactly where it's
People
going to
could
be.
just go to the Maine People's Alliance
Right,
website, I'm sure, and get the
absolutely.
information.
Right.
And what about the other two behind you?
Well, one is Frances Perkins, and she has come to prominence recently because of the governors taking down the Labor Bureau from the Department of Labor. She was an extraordinarily important figure in American history that many people have, well, I wouldn't say they've forgotten. They've been, it's just her history has no longer been told, and that's part of what I'm trying to do. She was the first female American cabinet member. She was the Secretary of Labor under FDR, through 4 terms with him. There were only 2 cabinet members who stayed for all 4 terms, and she was one of them. And what's so extraordinary about her is that, we think of FDR and we think of the New Deal, almost immediately. Those programs that, all about the end of child labor, workplace safety, minimum wage, other protections for workers, all that kind of stuff, Social Security, those were all Frances Perkins' ideas. When FDR tried to encourage her to join his cabinet, and she kept putting him off, and finally he said, I'll do anything. And she said, okay, well, look, if I come in there, you've got to support me until we get these changes in American labor law. And he did that. He actually, 3 times she tried to resign, and he supported her. For the first time ever, and probably the only time, the Congress tried to impeach a member of the cabinet, which was Frances Perkins, because of her radical ideas.
And what was her association with Maine?
Well, she came from, her family had come from Damariscotta. Their business had failed early on, and her father had moved the family to Boston and then out to Worcester. But the family is there, and now the Frances Perkins Center is right here in Maine.
And then the other one?
Well, that's Camilo Mejia. He was the first American soldier to refuse to go back to Iraq. He joined the Army hoping to get more money for education, like so many young men do. And all of a sudden he found himself being deployed to Iraq, and then asked to do things that he found reprehensible. I mean, he had been there only a short time, and he was asked to participate in torture. He found himself shooting civilians, and was appalled by not just his personal character, but what the whole mission seemed to be. And when he came home on leave, he refused to go back. And at first he went AWOL, and then he realized that he needed to face this directly, and so he went and turned himself in, and he was sentenced to a year in jail for it. But well, I should say because of that, I think. I mean, he made a statement from jail that I think will eventually rank, when people have enough perspective on this, as one of the great American statements of conscience about what it means to be a free person. I mean, when he ended up in jail, he said, for the first time in my life, I'm a free man.
He was just recently in Maine. He spoke at the Maine Veterans for Peace Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Conference in late April.
Right.
So he was a very moving speaker, actually, at that event. So as you have been painting this series, people are calling you and requesting that you travel this series of portraits around the country and go and speak. And you've been speaking a lot in schools too, right? Tell us a little bit about the kind of experiences you've had speaking in some of the schools and other places with these portraits.
Well, first, it's surprising. I'm very surprised. I never expected what has happened with this project to continue like this, or even to get going like this. I thought I'd end up with a basement full of paintings that nobody wanted to see. And even when I had just the first 10 paintings done and showed them in a little sandwich shop in Ellsworth, Maine, I got invited to come into some local schools and talk about who the people were. And I mean, I'd painted at that point Sojourner Truth, Walt Whitman, like we said, maybe Martin Luther King, Jane Addams, people, prominent people. And now, I mean, the show has been in, I don't know, 25 or 30 states, and everywhere it goes. I get invited into schools, everything from kindergarten to college. And I love talking at all these different levels about what the meaning of these people's lives are for everybody.
Earlier you told me that you were just in Racine, Wisconsin, speaking to high school students, leaders you said, and you said they didn't know much about what's going on in the country or civics issues. Tell that story.
Well, yes, I was just in Racine, and I was invited to come into, there are 3 big high schools in Racine, Wisconsin. I mean, each school well over 2,000 kids, very multi-ethnic schools. And I was invited to speak to 3 groups, one in each school, of the school leaders. I mean, sometimes the groups were, maybe 15, 20 kids. And so you assume, when you're talking to those kids, you're talking to some of the brightest kids in the school. But when you talk about American history, you talk about civics, you talk about the obligations of citizenship, you talk about what it is that makes a democracy work, what kind of institutions you have to have, what kind of behavior. These kids don't know anything. And I see that everywhere in the country. I mean, there are schools, obviously they're good schools where kids are being taught those issues, based around an ethic of service to the community. There's a lot of private schools where kids are very well instructed. But I find that the average public school in this country, it's hard to know what they are learning, but they're certainly not learning anything about citizenship, and they're not learning about their own history. And of course, when you cut off people from a knowledge, a true story of where they came from, how they got there, what they should be doing to maintain their own freedoms, when they don't have those stories, they don't know who they are. And they also don't know how to handle the issues that are coming towards them.
Do you have a sense of why that is? Why there's this breakdown in the school system across the country?
Well, there are probably a lot of different reasons, but I think a country provides an educational system to make a kind of student that it wants. I mean, to build a kind of person that it wants for that society. And I think that our culture now, our economic culture, prefers people who basically are conformists, who don't know history, who don't ask questions.
Good consumers.
And are good consumers and know some skills and know how to do a certain kind of job. And and assume that their responsibility as Americans is to do that, to consume and to work, period.
I'm talking to Robert Shetterly, who's an artist from Brooksville and who has created a series of paintings called Americans Who Tell the Truth. And you have a website, www.americanswhotellthetruth.org, right?
Right.
So people can go there and see all the paintings and a description about each person. And you also have published a book with many of these paintings in it.
Right, there's a book of the first 50 portraits, and hopefully in the next year or two there'll start to be a series of books. We want to do books about, instead of a giant coffee table book with 150, 200 portraits in it, we'll do books about themes like Americans Who Tell the Truth, the Black History Movement, or Americans Who Tell the Truth, the Environmentalists, or something like that.
So this has become quite a career for you.
More than a career, it's an obsession, yes.
But in addition to this artwork that you're doing, you're also the president of an organization called the Union of Maine Visual Artists. Mm-hmm. And you've been one of the leaders in the recent protest here in the state against Governor LePage's decision to take the labor mural from the Department of Labor in Augusta.
Right.
So tell us about the group, and then also tell us about why artists in Maine are upset with the governor, with Governor LePage, for taking down that labor mural.
The Union of Maine Visual Artists started right here in the Brunswick, Bath, Bodenham area about 1975, and it has continued as a support union for artists ever since then, largely on political issues. The Union of Maine Visual Artists was the organization that lobbied for the Percent for Art program in Maine. It's gotten a lot of the juried fees taken away of major shows in Maine so that artists don't have to pay to have their work displayed or judged. And in the last few years, one of our biggest projects has been to make a series of documentaries about lesser known but we think very important Maine artists who aren't Andrew Wyeth. And so we've been very successful doing that. This issue, though, is right up our alley. You know, this wanting to take down, I mean, the governor not wanting to, but actually taking down, you know, the labor mural from the Department of Labor, Judy Taylor's mural. You know, we see it as an issue that attacks artists, that attacks free speech, that it's an issue of censorship. It's an issue of, I mean, it's got so many different ramifications, you know, that we feel are important to our role as artists, that, you know, are both about the role of an artist in a society, but also the role about an artist in relationship to other organizations in society, especially, you know, around social and economic and, you know, political justice issues.
Well, there's a legal case. You and some others have gone to court to try to sue to bring the mural back. Right. What's the status of that case right now?
Well, I'm one of 6 plaintiffs in the case against the governor, and the first court case was heard a couple weeks ago, where we filed to have a temporary restraining order, which would require the governor to put the mural back, and at least until we can resolve some of the other issues. And we lost that case. I mean, we lost the restraining order, but that didn't stop the case. I mean, there's still issues of free speech, and one of the things that came up in that first one was this concept, which until this happened I'd never even been aware of, that there's something called government speech, which is protected, which basically allows a state government or the federal government to, in a sense, trump free speech with its own propaganda. And they are characterizing the mural, which tells a true history, in a very gentle, really, true history of the labor movement in Maine, you know, about child labor and different strikes and you know, organizing and things like that. They're saying that you know, that true history needs to be replaced with something that's more pro-business. And, you know, we see this as a case of censorship, but they're saying they're allowed to do that. And we're saying, wait a minute, this is, you know, free speech case, and it shouldn't be allowed, you know, to be replaced with propaganda. Yeah,
it would appear to me that the labor movement in Maine and the Democratic Party even, for obvious reasons, because it's a Republican governor who made this decision, it would appear that they would be really strong allies in this mural fight. Have they been?
You know, that's an interesting question, Bruce. I mean, I think that the answer is yes and no. They were at the beginning. We thought that they were fully behind us and with us. I mean, one of the great things that was happening was that around this issue, these collaborations were being built. You know, artists with working people, which is something that we've often aspired to. But since then, it's waned a little bit. Which doesn't mean that individual working people and some groups aren't with us, but we've been disappointed that the Democratic legislators in the state have not been strong on this issue. They've tried to avoid it. And I think some of the working people, I mean, working organizations, some of the unions in Maine, have also been careful, let's put it that way, careful about aligning themselves too strongly with this issue. I think they're afraid that if they come out too strongly on this issue, it may hurt some of their organizing around other issues which they think are important to labor. And so, you know, I don't know what to make of it. I mean, it's one of those things you see it happening when you're involved in it, and you think, gee, why aren't they right with us here? Mm-hmm. They're not, and at least as fully as we would like them to be.
It was my perception that the unions and the Democrats were glad to see the artist take the leadership and go out front and take on the governor, but that, as you said, they didn't want to you know, get too out front on this, because somehow I think they feared that it might affect their relationship with the Republicans who now control the state legislature. That's kind of the way it appeared to me, that they were a bit more concerned about that than the overall censorship issue and shutting down of the labor history issue. But you know, this mural fight is to me so important because it reflects on this earlier point you made about the history being kind of washed away for the younger generations. And this whole controversy around the mural has brought some of that Maine labor history back into the public consciousness at a time when, again, it's kind of going out to sea.
Absolutely. You know, one of the ironies of this whole business is that probably very few people in Maine knew that that mural even existed, much less the history behind it, or, for instance, who a person like Frances Perkins was and why she was so important. I mean, one of the other things the governor did was, you know, there were committee rooms in the Department of Labor that were named for labor leaders. One was Frances Perkins, another was Cesar Chavez. You know, he's having those names removed. And so, ironically, this whole struggle has allowed a lot of education to take place around those issues.
I want to move back to your series of portraits, Americans Who Tell the Truth. And again, you can go to Rob's website at americanswhotellthetruth.org to see the paintings yourself. But you travel extensively, and I imagine you're learning a lot about America's fiscal crisis. If you're talking in schools, you're hearing a lot about cutbacks in education and other such things. Tell us briefly, what are you seeing as you travel around the country today?
Multiple things. I mean, when I see, if kids don't know about their own history and about citizenship and democracy, what they do know about is that the schools are suffering cutbacks. They know that. They know that programs are being cut back. They know their classes are larger than they used to be. They know there's a lot of stress inside the schools as they're being taught, you know, only to take tests. They know that they're not happy in these situations. They also, you see everywhere, the stress reflected through the kids about what's happening to their parents being out of work. But I also see everywhere I go, wonderful people, upset, angry, but organizing around, you know, all these big issues around privatization and deregulation and cutbacks and health care. And you know, on the one hand, there's this enormous ignorance out there. On the other hand, there's because of, you know, the events, people are waking up and educating themselves.
So we don't see much of that on the evening news, do we?
No, we don't see it, right? Yeah, but it's there, and it's certainly going on, and it's very, you know, you get a kind of mixed feeling. I mean, one, it's the toll that it's taking on people is very sad. What people are going through. And often people are not making any connection between what's happening to them and the wars that are going on, and the money that, you know, all this money, $1 trillion, you know, being spent on war, that could be in their own communities, and the money that's being, I mean, well, they know, and you always hear said, you know, we're the richest country on earth, you know, but the richest people and the richest corporations aren't paying for, you know, any of this, and they know the money is there, either in the war or in the banks or in, you know, in Wall Street. It's just not, you know, being given to them, you know, and the people who need it the most. They know that. There
are 46 states now in fiscal crisis across the country. Mm-hmm. They say the combined debt of these 46 states is $130 billion. Mm-hmm. And just this year alone, we're going to spend $170 billion on our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and now Libya. Mm-hmm. So if we really wanted to solve our fiscal crisis, we would just bring those war dollars home, and we'd be really not having to lay off the teachers and fire the policemen and firefighters and a whole lot of other people as well.
Well, one thing that's interesting is, since I started this project, and it came out of a extreme upset about being taken into war, I always made a point of going out and talking about war. And I would get a lot of pushback, you know, 6 or 7 years ago, from kids, from school administrators, from parents saying, oh, well, you know, you shouldn't say that about the wars. And I don't get any of that anymore. Really? I can talk completely openly about the lies that we're told and the government lying and why they did it and what the resource wars were really, you know, that they're resource wars and what they're really about. Nobody questions.
So in spite of the control of the mainstream media by the corporations and the corporate agenda, somehow the information and the consciousness is seeping through to the people, isn't it?
It definitely is. Yeah.
I want to end with we've got just a few minutes left, with more of a personal reflection from you, if we could. After all the research, and you do extensive research, right, as you paint each person. Right. So all the research, and you meet the people and talk to them. How has this process changed you? Because it must be an incredible gift in a lot of ways to meet these folks.
It has been extraordinary. I mean, there are lots of ways it's affected me very personally, but certainly one is that I was in a state of despair about where the country was going, where the world was going, and my lack of ability to do anything, or have any kind of voice. And in a sense, by using people like you, almost as a ventriloquist, I'm able to enlarge my own voice and make me feel, to whatever extent is possible, that I'm engaged and maybe even helping to do a little bit about some of these issues. So it's given me a way to be engaged and feel positive instead of feeling crushed by the times. I do see a lot of people feeling crushed, though, and voiceless. The other thing is it's completely changed the focus of my life. I mean, I'm doing a kind of art that's 180 degrees different from what I believed art should be.
You used to be more of an abstract artist.
Abstract, surrealist. I mean, I'm doing didactic art now. I mean, I would have believed that I would be doing this kind of art. But we have to do what the times require of us, and this is what seemed to be the most important thing. And it just gives me a sense of, kind of mission at this point in my life, which I don't think in my, I'm almost 65 years old, and I feel I'm more engaged now than in art and all the issues of the world than I ever was.
In a way, you've truly followed your heart, haven't you?
I have. I took a big leap, when I decided to do this, because I don't sell these paintings. I'm going to give the whole collection away at some point, and I thought, I was surviving off of selling art, and I don't sell art anymore. So to do this was a big jump, and
and now you make an income by people paying you to come speak, right?
Exactly.
And
exactly.
To students and others around the country.
It ain't a lot, but it pays the bills.
Yeah,
that's
well,
great.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I think we have about a minute left. Anything you want to close with?
Well, I would say, to anybody who was watching this, I'd say, from my own experience in this, just how important it is, one, to put, your role as a citizen ahead of some other roles that we play in the society now. That we're at this crucial, crucial time in not just the history of this country, but the history of the world. And whether it's going to be a place that's a comfortable place for human civilization to try to live is, up in the air right now. And that it's going to take all of us doing, acting at big and little ways to, avert a whole series of crises. And that, I would appeal to everyone to get engaged in some way.
Well, Rob, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks.
I really appreciate it.
Very nice of you.
And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.